Hey, it's William again. I have something really important that we're going to be talking about today. Last night, I went to a homeless move along to where is what it was called. I'm calling it an expo. I'm not really even sure what that word means, or if they were referring to it as an expo. It was taking place at the Expo Center, so I think that's why I'm making that connection. But it was an event entirely surrounded about talking about homeless people, the problems they encounter, their experiences. They had homeless people speak, and also solutions about, how can we effectively end homelessness. And I think the reason I'm having trouble summing up my experience last night is because it was so powerful. I ran out of battery life on my camera, so I couldn't catch the end call to action, which I really wish I had. But I caught the 45-minute of the panelists and the hour and 10 minutes, probably, I think, hour and 15 minutes of the people in the audience speaking, because they wanted to end the audience questions, but the audience protested, held a vote, and then the people who were holding the event gave in, and we continued having the discussion with the audience, which I thought was amazing and needs to happen everywhere. But I'm going to be playing some clips. It's probably going to be a really long video, and then I'm going to be talking about them a little bit. This first guy is Tony Robinson, a professor of political science at University of Colorado, and is adamantly against the camping ban and has gathered a bunch of research supporting repealing the camping ban. So let's take a listen.
I know a lot of people here know the fact that tonight has been true for a decade. 1,000 people, by the city's own count, will be sleeping without formal shelter tonight. They're in the Denver area, about half of them in Denver. That means in cars or along the South Platte without any kind of shelter. This has been going on, as we know, and been getting worse for the last 20 years, a process of gentrification and loss of affordable housing, as well as the federal government pullback from public housing and Section 8 resources. These things have led to the fact that the Colorado Division of Housing says that we have only about half as many housing units as are needed to house people of low incomes. Now, those are facts. What that leads to is in the last 10 or 15 years, homelessness in this city, people that cannot afford housing, has increased 600%. To about 10,000 in the region. The number of shelter beds over the last 15 years has stayed essentially steady. It's changed here and there a little bit, but essentially steady. 15 years ago, there were enough shelter beds for about half of the people who might need them at any given night. Today, there's about 15% that's available. This has led to a situation that we all know, which is there are hundreds of people who sleep in public, who have to every night to live. They have no option. This is problematic for people. It's not, setting aside the problematic for people sleeping, it led to a problem when hundreds of people were sleeping on 16th Street Mall, in front of the Capitol building. This led many city officials and leaders and business leaders a few years ago in 2012 to say this can't be sustained. Hundreds of people are sleeping on our streets. I know, Councilman, I remember reading about you did a walk down 16th Street several years ago. And you said, I count 180 people one night sleeping in like bedspreads and tents right here on 16th Street Mall. I remember reading that. He goes, this is not sustainable for a great city. It's like our front porch. And how do we live this way? And it is not productive for the people who are homeless. It is not a healthy way of life. So the city, with that reasoning, in 2012 passed the Denver camping ban. To be clear what that law states, the point of the law said, if you reside in public, you may not use any kind of shelter against the elements other than your clothes. That's the wording of the law.
So I just wanted to pause it for a second so we can understand what he's saying. Albus Brooks, city council president of the city council, walked down 16th Street Mall, counted 180 homeless people one day, went back to the city council and said, not let's house these people, let's find a solution to house these people, not let's start a jobs program so that these people can have a steady income, Not let's have a storage facility so these people can go to work without having to worry about their things being stolen. He went back to the city council and said, I'm not quoting him, but essentially what happened was he went back to city council and said, you know what? These homeless people are making 16th Street Mall ugly. Let's pass a camping ban so that we don't have to look at them anymore. If you're going to camp on the 16th Street Mall, you're not allowed to defend yourself against the weather at all. You can't have any type of shelter other than your own fucking clothes. Please tell me how that's a solution, other than making yourself feel better so you don't have to look at the homeless people, the 600% increase in homeless people, so that you don't have to think about how broken our society is and how you've contributed nothing to fix it.
You cannot sit on cardboard, you cannot sit on a piece of carpet, you cannot put a blanket over your head, none of it other than your clothes. It will be a violation of the law because there's too many people sleeping in public. What the intent of the law, according to city officials, is we don't mean to enforce this harshly, although it could lead to a time in jail and a fine.
Before we hear him out, which is very important, but think about that. It's not just jail time, it's a fine. You're fining someone who doesn't even have enough money to keep a roof over their head. Do you know what happens to fines when you don't pay them? They get bigger. They become debt to the state. You are indebting these people who already have nothing. You are kicking people when they are down, just so you don't have to fucking look at them. Just so you can say, go be a problem where I don't have to deal with you anymore.
The whole point of this law is what they called coercive care. This law, that's the wording of it, coercive care, call it tough love, call it compassionate disruption. The point of the law is that it's unhealthy to be on the streets. So Ray or anyone else in the streets, this law is going to help push you into services. And by doing that, you'll have a more healthy life long term. Plus, it'll prompt the city to put more resources into it. But we're not meaning to arrest people. People who oppose the law, of course, saw it differently. They said there are not enough resources. The city admits it. It will lead to harassment. It will lead to forcing people into hiding. It will lead to scattering of the homeless population in more hidden locations. Police will move people along. They will take their blankets. They may arrest them. It will harm the quality of life of homeless people, and it will be counterproductive for the reasons you just heard from our former presenter. I only got 5 minutes, so this leads me to this law has bitterly divided us. Everyone in this room knows it. I'm sure our councilman knows it. It has bitterly divided the city. Like, what's right and where's the truth here? I haven't seen in my years in Denver anything that's been as bitterly divisive as perhaps this law. It's been really troubling. So where are we here? I would ask the panel or others, if there's a way to build consensus, there's a few quick things that we really have to address together and come to some facts together. One, what is the real evidence that these laws, do they work? We just heard you say, no, they don't. I'd like to hear, evidence-based, as a class, when you pass these laws as a class, are homeless people better off or not, and where's the proof? We'd like to hear some of that. Two, how is policing really happening? Are people being swept and given tickets and moved along? Ray, I'd like to hear what you know about that, or others, because the city says they're not, but we need evidence on are they really just moving everybody into services and this is working productively. Finally, because I just have a brief number of time, maybe some thought on, is there a solution that works somehow for both sides? People said, well, they can't be sleeping on 16th Street. We can't have homeless people by the hundreds sleeping on 16th Street. So we pass a law that says you cannot use shelter anywhere in the city. Is there a consensus around the idea that, okay, maybe hundreds of people on 16th Street is not sustainable for a city, but are there alternative places and ways we can say in this place of the city, you can have a small home, you can have a tent, you can shelter yourself with fencing and water, and that we're not going to harass you with cops, and that'll be the area you can go, but you can't sleep all night on 16th Street with a tent. I don't know if those kind of solutions may bring us together, but I know this city is deeply divided on a citywide ban and criminalization of people who are homeless, and there's, I look forward to hearing what the panel has to say about these things.
So, I know what he's saying, again, still sounds like a Band-Aid. But I do want to make the point that the reality is it's going to take time to write policies, get them passed, implement them, and have them go into effect really that in a way that actually, helps people. So I think an example of this is after they legalized marijuana in Colorado in 2014, I believe, or 2012, one of them. One of the things that went into effect immediately was you are allowed to possess a certain amount of marijuana. You were allowed to smoke it in your own home. There just wasn't anywhere to buy it, and it was still illegal to buy it off of an unlicensed retailer. So, but that immediately decriminalized it for people who were being caught with possession on the streets, being caught smoking in their own homes for whatever reason. They also decriminalized, smoking, or not smoking, growing up to 6 plants. So that was an immediate effect to aid relief, basically. And what he's talking about at the end here, I think, is if we're going to have policies that actually substantively, efficiently get people off the streets permanently, that is going to take time. And what he's talking about, having certain areas just not on 16th Street where people can see you, but have a compromise, basically, until we can have a more comprehensive system to help these people, which I agree with. But at the same time, we see so often where the buck stops there, where it's just a Band-Aid to the problem. It's the compromise. We never actually go any further than that. And our job is to hold their feet to the fire and make sure that these people go through on these comprehensive policies that we're going to force them to write, that we're going to write them together. The people and the government, the activists, the homeless people. We're going to come together and we're going to fix this problem. The next speaker is Ray Lyle, and he is an actual homeless person. So we can hear from their perspective what it's like to be homeless, what's wrong with the camping ban, and how we can begin to address this issue. So let's take a listen to that.
Move along to where? Problem number one, there is simply nowhere to move along to. Not in another city, not in another state. No city in this entire country has enough year-round shelter beds. No city. And I'll get you the link if you want it. Just come see me later on. I'm not going to trash shelters because I know they're good for a lot of people. But I will give you one of my own opinions. Shelters are crowded, infected, infested kennels. I don't deserve to live there. Most of our shelters don't accept couples. There's a couple here tonight that can't get into a shelter without splitting up. Most of our shelters don't have rules against pets. I know a dog named Peanut that the police couldn't find a shelter for the other night. The number of items people can carry into a shelter, guess what? Homeless people shouldn't, just because you're homeless, doesn't mean you shouldn't have stuff. That's wrong.
A point he's making there, I just kind of want to reiterate that. It's not just with homeless people, but with poor people in general. Jimmy Dore talks about his brother. There's a joke he has. His brother says, there's a study that says, a certain percentage of poor people have microwaves or refrigerators or iPhones. And it's almost like his expectation of poor people is that all poor people are either homeless or they're not really poor, which is a weird, fucked up thing to think. But I just wanted to say that. Let's keep listening.
And we have the behaviors of people struggling with drugs and alcohol. Health and safety is another reason folks don't want to get into shelters, which is pretty funny because the city says sweeping is a health and safety issue. But I have to fight. Y'all might think that going to a shelter is like checking into the Ritz. It's not. I have to worry about getting sanitation, getting sick, and if somebody with bed bugs, scabies, hepatitis, or pneumonia wants to cuddle with me tonight. It seems to me, right now, and in the past, it seems to me that everybody is speaking to us, about us, and for us. And from now on, it's time for us to speak for ourselves. Solutions. The city has to commit to authorized encampments. Several examples already exist all across the nation. One of them is right here tonight. There could be several types established on public property, private property, providing a safe, warm, dignified place to stay. For example, churches could allow 8 to 12 people, either indoors, outdoors, or both, with a community agreement for everybody concerned. Self-governed tent villages ranging from 5 to 15 people. Small, self-governed tiny home villages with around 20 to 25 people. Tiny homes are really cute, really cute. All these alternative solutions can provide benefits like dignity, community, safety, support, and a sense of self-reliance. Not to mention, improve access to our outreach workers. She's running around here somewhere. Our service providers, I know they're running around here. And average tent city might cost approximately $30 to $60 a month for each person. The average monthly cost of housing for an individual in a homeless shelter, transitional housing, and permanent supportive housing, $1,600 to $2,400. Along with these solutions, we need more restrooms, which we talked about the other night, more trash cans. We can all use more trash cans. And it would be a nice idea if the city wanted to help us with some storage facilities. Above all else, the urban camping ban, the urban survival ban has to be repealed. That's it.
So one point Ray is making there is that it would be phenomenally cheaper to let homeless people have their own tent cities than it would be to keep running these shelters that are not enough and end up giving homeless people terrible experiences. And the next speaker is John Hayden, who is with the Curtis Park Neighborhood Association, and he's going to be making a couple points that I think are really important. So let's take a listen to that.
Okay. Oh, let's see. So where's my person who's going to tell me time? Okay, cool. Great. My name is John Hayden, and the problem, I think we'll start with Donald Trump as our president. But that is kind of a joke, but it's also kind of not, that we have to be very conscious that we are probably going to see the gutting of the Housing and Urban Development, the HUD agency. We're going to see the gutting of funding from federal programs that we heard had been going on for some time. It's about to get worse. So we as a city have got to understand that this is a problem we're going to have to deal with locally. We're probably not going to get funds from the federal government to assist us with this anytime soon. So when I look at the problem, having lived in 5 Points for the last 21 years, what I have come to realize is that there is a great deal of disparity between the resources that are allotted to different neighborhoods. And what we have seen over the past many decades, perhaps since the 1940s, is a pretty systematic segregation of people by race and income in our communities.
So John's point there is really great, and I just kind of want to word it a little bit differently. In my view, when you separate people based on their income, because of systematic racism and how much, the stereotypes of poor people being certain colors exist for a certain reason, and when you separate people based on income or class, there really isn't that much different from separating them based on race. And I think that's a great point he makes, so let's keep listening.
And what that has done is two things in my mind. One, it has created a system in those poor communities, which often end up being communities of color, where people have few resources and few options and end up in cycles of poverty that are hard to escape. It also creates this barrier where people live separate from each other and don't see each other as human beings. Becomes very easy to see those who are different from you as not human. It's dehumanizing. And so the ability for people to come together and bring solutions becomes more difficult. When I talk about the systematic way this happens, I want to make it clear that these are things that we can change. There are zoning codes that have created a situation where you can hardly find legally anywhere in this city to build a shelter. When the last shelter was proposed in Denver this summer, the people building it had to go before the Board of Adjustments to get a variance to even be able to build it. And one of the reasons they gave was that there just isn't anywhere in the city that you can build them. That is not because there isn't space or room for shelter or affordable housing to be built. It is because we have created a situation where we have zoned people into, you're going to live here and you're going to live here. So when I talk about that is what I see as a problem. So we've got neighborhoods that are very disparately treated. So in Sun Valley, for instance, 84% of the population there lives in poverty. In Globeville, 45% of the population lives in poverty. In West Washington Park, 7% of the population lives in poverty. There's room there to bring that together. And so when I look at the solution, what I see as a solution is not necessarily, I actually do think that it is fair for business owners and homeowners to say, you know what, I don't want you camping in front of my house. We have seen the results of that in 5 Points firsthand. However, we've also seen camps set up by Ray and Homeless Out Loud that were beautifully run, that were not a problem. And so you can have places where innovative housing solutions come from. And so what I believe ultimately is the solution is that we need to have dispersed throughout the city, and particularly in neighborhoods that do not currently have concentrations of poverty, we need to have fast, humane, innovative housing solutions for all people. We can show you how this works in 5 Points. We've got places where you have small 40 to 60 unit homes, apartment buildings and such of supportive housing that work. And so I think if you put those throughout the city, that's a solution that deconcentrates poverty and provides a humane environment for everyone. Thanks.
So the next guy who's going to be speaking is Andrew Feinstein, who is the Expo and Rhino Art District co-chair, which we can talk about the Rhino District and the problems going on there with gentrification later. But what he's going to be talking about is CEOs of businesses, or just business people in general who run businesses, whatever they're called. He doesn't understand their lack of motivation to have return on investment. Because, I mean, it's kind of like the theory that, you know, when you give poor people money, the first thing they do is put it right back into the economy, which is true. I'm an example of that. I've lived a pretty privileged life, but, you know, these last 10 years, it's gotten harder and harder and harder to get by on the same amount of money. And when my dad passed away and I got his life insurance, that thousands of dollars went right back into the economy. There isn't much left of it. So it's only been a couple months. You know, poor people, if you give them money, you create a better economy. Very much so. So let's take a listen to Andrew. Before we go on, I just want to apologize for my camera work. Still learning here, so just bear with me.
Again, I'm Andrew Feinstein. Thank you again for being here in our home tonight, not just here at Exto, but here in Rhino. I agree with a lot of what my three fellow panelists said in terms of what the problems are. I'd like to talk a little bit about what I think are some possible solutions. I was asked to be on this panel tonight to give a business owner's perspective on the issue. And I think we got to look at the big picture, and then I want to narrow it down to some smaller picture solutions and things that we've actually done at Exto that I think could be very beneficial to other businesses, both big and small, throughout the city. So I think from a big picture standpoint, I think the challenge and the struggle with homelessness is a lot of business-oriented people, they don't see the return on investment. And that's unfortunate, because if we were to invest in a lot of the ideas that these three gentlemen propose, and I'm sure the rest of our panelists are going to talk about tonight, including a lot of the things that the city's already doing and adding to that, as Doug said, a business owner doesn't want to see, doesn't want to have someone sleeping on their front porch, just like the gentleman or the woman sleeping on that front porch doesn't want to be there. So if we could, whether it's a bond issue or a ballot initiative or a sales tax, if we could, as a community, as a business community, and as a residential community, get behind and coalesce around a concept of raising money for the type of services that I think everybody in this room knows we need, in the long term, that's going to be good for business, because more businesses are going to want to locate to Denver. More people are going to want to move to Denver, because folks are going to look at Denver and say, wow, here's a community where the residential community, the business community, and the government all work together to work on this issue, get these folks in dignified housing, get these folks both the medical and the psychological care that they may need, then that's going to be a much better place to invest for everybody. So that's kind of the big picture. From a small picture standpoint, here at Exto, we have about 100 plus employees. And it's going to sound a little crazy, but thanks to the lawyers these days, we have to do thorough background checks on everybody we hire. And a lot of times, folks that are homeless may not have the best background check, because when someone's in a desperate situation, they make desperate decisions. And as a result of that, they may have engaged in some sort of criminal activity or deemed to be criminal activity. So what I would ask other business owners, because I know we've done this at Exto, is show some compassion, show some empathy, show some leniency when you're looking at someone's background check. And have a conversation, why did this incident happen? Why did that incident happen? And give them that second chance. Maybe they need a third chance. Maybe they need a fourth chance. But give them that chance, because I know we need the labor in this market, which brings me to my third point. Construction costs are really high right now. The reason housing is so expensive is because it costs a lot to build housing right now, because the labor supply is so short, okay? And this is happening across the country in all sorts of labor, trade labor sectors. Also, you guys are probably wondering, why are food costs so high these days? It's because it's really hard to hire folks in the hospitality business, which is the business that we at Exto are engaged in. So I think businesses, my challenge and my charge to other business owners is, let's work with this disenfranchised community. Let's get them into our businesses. And the city of Denver just started this jobs program so that homeless folks can work with Parks and Recreation and other parts of Denver. Let's work with the city of Denver. Let's expand that. And let's get a lot of these guys, men and women, trained to work in different types of sectors, not just the public sector. So again, those are my three major points. I think number one, we need to have a big picture conversation about investing in this community, because I do think the return on investment is there in the long run. Number two, I think that businesses, big and small, need to show some compassion and leniency when interviewing people and hiring people. And number three, let's get these folks trained. Let's pair the need for labor with this labor force that's right over there on Broadway and Lawrence. Let's get them to work, and let's work together. I think that could be a great solution. So again, I want to thank you all for being here. This turnout is incredible, and thanks again for having me on the panel. It means a lot. Thanks.
So I wish I had done the research to back up his facts, because I don't want to take what he says at face value, obviously. But I was towards the end of the panelist section when Albus Brooks was talking. And as soon as the last panelist finished, I started this video, because I get heated towards the end when he starts speaking. But if that's true, obviously that's a huge problem. But the main point of his speak, all right, of his speech is that, first of all, compassionate CEOs exist. I mean, my favorite example of that is Cenk Uygur, CEO of the Young Turks. He pays his employees like they're people, or tries to, as much as he can with, the membership money that he gets every month. And his solutions to the problems seem realistic. I don't really have much to say about this guy other than I agree, with what he's saying, is that if CEOs saw their workers as people, as equals, as if they treated their workers the way they would want to be treated if they were in the same position, we wouldn't have this problem. If there was compassionate, empathetical people, I don't know if that's a word, but I just made it up maybe. If those were the people that were in charge, I don't think we'd have this problem. And if we did, we wouldn't have it at such a large portion, a large amount. I can't speak today. But the next speaker I'm going to go to is, I couldn't really figure out if I wanted to skip over her or not. But I think me talking about compassion right now, her story or her speech kind of plays to that exactly. So let's take a listen to it.
So when I was a little girl, my family would get in our 77 Thunderbird that didn't have air conditioning and drive through the Arizona desert to find my great-grandfather. Because my great-grandfather had left at age 40 and lived in the desert in the equivalent of a tiny house. But we were following the same tradition that my mother had done with her father, which was to go and find him and keep him connected and let him know that he is loved. When we would drive out there, we would bring lunch for the day, and we would sit with him, and we would talk. And his mouth was a little bit like Ray's. He used the F word as a comma, so that's why I'm pretty comfortable with that. We talked about this. So my mom would go out and make sure he knew that we were there. And it was that common humanity. What I learned as a child is that all people deserve dignity, and that no matter what a person does in their life, they are always, first and foremost, a human being who deserves love and compassion and kindness and home. And home is more than a roof. Home is a community and connection and a place of our own, and place where we are allowed to be ourselves and live our life the way that we want to live it. So I think that as we talk about the problems and the solutions that we're facing, that we need to take a step back and peel back and say, what are we so afraid of? Why is this such a contentious issue in our community? Why are we so scared of human beings that we would rather sweep them into the shadows than listen to their stories, and to work together to assure that all people have an opportunity to thrive and to live and to be in community in the way that they would like to live. So as I encroach and work with the Interfaith Alliance of Colorado and get to know people in the community, that's the question that I'm asking. How can we do this? Grounded first and foremost in human dignity, and second in creativity. If we come together and let go of our fears and start putting together our creative minds, this is an amazing creative group of people here in this room and in our city. There has to be another way. So we're working on some of those other ways with the Alternative Solutions Advocacy Project, and I hope that we can continue to talk about dispersed communities, self-determined governance, tiny homes, circ houses, ways to be, what is the dwelling units behind, what's the technical term for that? EDU, yes, they got it. So we need to think outside the box and get creative and come together and let go of our fear and ground ourselves in dignity. Thanks.
So her point was basically that all humans deserve dignity. All humans deserve basic human rights. The rights to air, clean air, the right to clean water, the right to a shelter, warmth, even air conditioning in the summer, man. It's with climate change, it's getting so bad that I think, this year and the next couple of years, having air conditioning might actually be, the difference between life and death, and at least in the next couple of decades, But her name was Amanda Henderson of Interfaith Alliance of Colorado. I believe she's a minister. I'm not too sure about the positions in a religious organization, so please excuse me if I'm getting that wrong. The next speaker is, I'm sorry if I mispronounced this, Ibrahim Mubarak. He really drives the point home. I think out of all the people we've heard speak so far, which I do want to mention that they've all been white so far, I'm going to let him speak for himself. Let's listen.
We all recognize that it's a problem here in this country. So I like audience participation. So I want to talk about housing. And when we was growing up, there was a fairy tale about the three little pigs. They had a wood house, a brick house, and a straw house. But you never heard about the fourth one with the vinyl house. Like that. So I want to ask you all a question. How many people know a houseless person? How many people are aware of houselessness? How many people would trade a place with a houseless person?
Now, because I couldn't zoom out quick enough to catch the audience members, first two questions, almost everybody raised their hand. Last question, not a single person raised their hand, obviously.
I don't think y'all heard me. If you know people are being swept, if you know people are being criminalized, if you know people, human rights are being taken away from them, why aren't you doing something?
And to come back to the point earlier about the camping ban, why aren't people doing anything? Why? I don't know, because throughout the entirety of this country, we have been taught individualism. If you didn't make it, it's your fault. You didn't work hard enough. You didn't try hard enough. You didn't care hard enough. So when we see homeless people, our first thought isn't, oh, the government has failed you. The state has failed you. We have failed you. No, we think you failed yourself. And we keep on walking because we have to fend for ourselves. Why couldn't you? And it's sad. The reason I think, let's just keep hearing him out.
The problem lies with that. The problem are not the people. The problem is the problem. We got to stop looking at people that can't make it in this country, in this world, as a problem. It's not my fault that the economic system is going skyrocket and I can't afford it. Solutions are, a problem should always have a solution. Solution is you make things affordable, you create spending power. You create spending power, you create employment. I say it again. You make things affordable, you create spending power. You create spending power, you create employment. People are working but can't afford the high rise, the high rent of housing or apartment complex. People are working but can't afford to keep their family together. So why should we separate, as Ray said, our family? We got men's shelter here, we got women's shelter there, and the biggest question nobody ever asks, where do the children go? They either run the streets or they get taken away from their parents, and we pay another adult to raise somebody else's children instead of giving that family money to raise their own children and live in a house. That's a problem.
I think he makes such a great point here, which I am upset that until he said that last night, I never even thought of that. I never saw it that way. It never occurred to me. But that is such a great point, that we are willing to pay people who are already well off to take care of children that aren't theirs. But God forbid we pay people to take care of their own children. How many times have we heard of foster parents abusing, neglecting, murdering foster children? And we're paying them to do it. I'm not saying we're paying them to abuse it, but the likelihood that you're going to abuse your own child is a lot less. I know it still happens. But it's such a great point I think he made there. Let's keep going.